Hey everyone, today I'm taking a look at Bora Bora, which is a board game dating back to 2013, designed by Stefan Feld and published by Ravensburger. This is a dice placement Euro strategy game for 2 to 4 players that takes around 90 minutes to play on average. So the board of Bora Bora is going to look like this when it's set up. We have this part of the map here, which is the actual map itself, and you can see here on this map you have lots of different terrain types. And within those terrain types, you've got these different sections here where if you move your little huts into, then you're going to get these bonuses and also potential endgame points if you end up claiming that spot. Additionally, to the top right of the board here, you've got this tattoo track, which is essentially an initiative track. So the further you get along this, you're more likely to get first place in the following round. And additionally, you can get points for doing so. You have the temple here, which is like a little area majority style game or an area control style game where you can get points. And you have this big jewelry kind of grid here, which at the end of each of the 6 rounds, you're going to have the opportunity to buy a piece of jewelry for victory points, and it's going to cost you these little shells in order to buy those. Additionally, you have this segment here where you're going to be claiming these objectives, which you're trying to work towards, where again, at the end of each round, you have the opportunity to claim one of these objectives, or say you completed them in order to get either 6 points or 4 points if you've had a little bit of help, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. And you also have these 2 segments here where you have these male and female helpers, which will kind of help you build your engine and give you little abilities as the game plays on. You're also going to have these different tiles here, which determines all the different actions you can take. And this is going to look slightly different depending on the player count. So for example, in a higher player count game, then this man and female tile will actually be 2 separate ones rather than on the same tile, just to keep the game tighter. Additionally, you have a stack of cards here. And each personal player's board is going to look like this, where you have this kind of summary of all the different actions you can take, which looks a bit busier than it is in reality. You have this little kind of construction yard here, where you can potentially put these little buildings down, and you have your little grid of huts, which of course you're trying to get onto the map here, and will actually open your capacity to bring in these male and female helpers. And then at the bottom of your little player map, or little player board here, you have your little storage space for the ongoing objectives that you currently have in your personal supply. So yeah, I'm working on these objectives at the moment. And additionally, you're going to have some of these God cards, which will give you little boosts throughout the game, and these offerings, and there's all the different kind of resources here, such as these shells and the different kind of sand, stone, and wood resources. Okay, so as you'd probably expect with the Stefan Feld game, the objective of this game is to get as many victory points as you can by the end of the 6 rounds, and you're going to do that by placing your dice here. So at the start of each round, you're going to roll your 3 dice. So let's just say I've already done that, and then in turn, you're going to be placing them on these different actions. So the actions are pretty simple in their own right. So this one here lets you basically spread where your huts are. So you can see, for me as the black player, to get into this area here, I'd need to have at least a value 4 dice and place it on that objective. So I could, for example, do this, put the 4 on there, and then move my next hut along from my player board here and onto that spot, claiming the reward here. And again, as I mentioned earlier, at the end of the game, these different fish tokens are going to offer you endgame points. The second one here is to put one of these buildings down onto your little grid here. So as the game develops, you're going to gather these different resources, either from going into these different regions, like so. Let's just say I got a wood earlier. And again, if I claim that action, I can place one of the buildings up to the value that I've placed here. So you can see I put a 2 here. I can put either a 1 or 2 building next to 2 adjacent resources like so. So I could put that one down there and claim that spot and flip it over just to show it's done. And you are rewarded to do that earlier in the game, because you can see here that if I get it down in the 1st or 2nd round, then I'm going to get 10 points for doing that. In the 3rd or 4th round, I'm going to get 7 points, but in the 5th or 6th round, I'm going to get 4 points. So think of something like the Castles of Burgundy, where you're incentivized to get things done earlier, and following getting those points, you're going to get one of these bonfire bonuses, which will either let you draw a God card or an offering, or go up the tattoo track, or gain a shell. This tile here with a male or female on it lets you take one of these male or female characters up to the pit value that you've placed. So if I put a 5 on there, I could take any of these 5 characters, but I could not take the 6th one. And they, as I mentioned earlier, are going to give you abilities to use after the dice placement phase, and also can potentially give you tattoos or shells, which we'll touch on a bit later. Additionally, you've got this temple action here, which is really simple. So let's say I put a 5 on there, like so. I'm going to take one of my little pawns here and place it on the corresponding number on the track, like so, on the 5 here. And basically what that means is at the end of each round, depending on how many people you have on that track, you're going to get a number of points. So in the first or second round, I'm going to get 1 point for each person I've got on there, but in the 5th or 6th round, I'm going to get 3 points each. But they really do kind of accrue points as the game goes on, because the longer you leave them there, they're just going to passively gain you points. But if somebody wanted to, say, place another 1 on there, and they say they placed a 5 as well, they would actually push me along here, and of course the more people who do that can potentially push you off the track. So there is that kind of competition to stay in that temple area. And the final action spot is this one here, which corresponds to this little part on your player board, which shows a number of different actions you can take for taking that action, divisible by the numbers here. So let's just say I placed a 5 on there. I could maybe take 5 1-point actions, or I could take maybe two 2s and a 1, or 1 2 and 3 1s, however I want, and I can spend them doing these different actions. So the first one is to use a male or female character to take the shells or the tattoos. So let's just say I did that for 1 action point. I could slide this down here and then move the number of tattoos along that track, again potentially getting me points and breaking the initiative of the other players. The same applies to the female one. You can get a 1-for-1 ratio on points. You can spend 2 points to move one of these huts down to the bottom section, like so, because you might want to be creating these openings so that you can, get more people into your fold. Additionally, you can draw these god cards, you can draw these offerings, or you can take any of the resources. So at face value, it might seem like a very simple dice placement game. However, there is one pretty significant twist on the game, and that is the restrictions when placing dice on these actions. So obviously this would happen in player order, but whenever you place a dice on on action that somebody has already claimed, then you have to go a lower pip value. So if I had a 4 here as the blue player, I could not place it here or here. I would have to place it here, here or here, because you always have to decrease in value. So what that means is that the high value dice are great because you get stronger actions, but they make you a lot less flexible, whereas the lower dice are, they're not such strong actions, but it means you pretty much got the freedom to go where you want. And once all the players have finished placing their dice, you're going to go on to phase B here, where you can activate a single male and a single female character and get their respective bonuses. So you can see this male here gives me one of these offering tokens, which lets you play these god cards, again, which I'll touch on very shortly. And this one here gets me one of these shells. But of course, as you acquire more and more of these male and female characters, then you can have that kind of freedom to select which ones you want to use at any time. And additionally, some of the characters combo with each other. So if you get the same ones, you can get the same action, but at a stronger value. And once you've finished taking the male and female action, you're going to go through this little housekeeping phase where you're going to calculate who's got the who's highest up the tattoo track, who will be first player next round, and get the corresponding points. You're going to calculate who's in the temple, and the winner, as in the person who's got the most coverage, is going to get one of these god tiles here, which are basically like a wild god card. And each player is going to have, in turn, an option to buy a piece of jewellery from the marker here, which you are going to be spending your shells on in order to claim those points. So you can see this one here, it only cost me 1 shell, but it's only going to offer me 1 point, whereas this one here cost me 4 shells, but gets me a pretty big 7 points. And after that, one of the biggest parts of the game is making sure that you have your objectives complete. So as I mentioned earlier, each player is always going to have 3 objective cards, objective tiles on the go at once. So you can see this one here is to have 2 of these rowing characters, which I haven't achieved, 2 rings, or 2 yellow god cards. I don't have to spend those, I just need to have them. And again, if you have achieved that, then you're going to get 6 points and cash in that tile, or you can potentially use these yellow god tiles, which let you complete the objectives, but at a discount, but they will give you -2 points for doing so. So that's going to be a big way of getting points, and then you're going to draft a new objective onto your player board, ready to go forward in the game. At the end of each round, any of these jewellery tiles that haven't been purchased are going to get wiped off the board. Same goes with the male and female tiles, they're going to get replenished with new ones. Let's touch on what some of these god cards do, which you can play at specific times. and they'll always cost you an offering to pay them. So we already touched on this objective one here, which will let you complete objective at a 1 discount, but score you -2 points. This one here lets you play any die on the objectives or on the action tiles, but as if it was a value 6. So it lets you take a stronger action with a weaker die. This one here means that you can claim those points from the island fish here instantly as well as at the end of the game. So let's just say I ventured straight into this 5-point value region. I could cash in one of those cards in an offering and get those points immediately as well as the end of the game. This one here, when it comes to the male and female phase, you can use another character or even use it as strength stronger. And this one here lets you even break that rule of being able to place higher die over the lower ones. There are also quite a few endgame scoring objectives which you might want to work towards. For example, if you buy a piece of jewellery every single round, then you'll get an additional 6 points. Or if you complete all 9 objectives, because you can complete one at the end of each round, but at the end of the last round, you can complete an additional 2. You're going to get an additional 6 points if you complete all of those. If you completely place all of your huts on the board, you're going to get 6 more points, or fill up all your huts with people, or get all of these spaces filled up, or get all these buildings down. So you're under a lot of pressure to do a lot of things. So let's get into the review of Bora Bora. So if you like my channel, you're probably quite aware that I'm a huge Stefan Feld fan, and particularly when he does what he does best, these point salad style games. And this one certainly is that. This has been a grail game for me for a long, long time, but I've not been able to find it. It's very hard to come by, but hopefully that will change sooner or later. But on top of that, I really enjoy dice placement games. It's one of my favourite mechanisms, and this game does it exceptionally well, particularly because you only have 3 placements each round, which, it might sound quite loose and forgiving. It actually is not, because there is so much you need to do with those dice, and pulling it all off is extremely difficult, and you really do have to utilise all these different male and female characters in order to get the most out of your turns, which was quite a big learning curve for me to conquer, because you start to think, well, you get distracted very easily. Of course, you want to get people down on this temple track because they're going to get you points every single round, and why wouldn't you do that? But simply because you haven't got the dice to do other things. You want to be venturing into these other regions because they're going to get you a lot of points, get you resources, but additionally you want to be working towards your objectives every single round, which might pull you in different directions by making you collect other people, making you collect certain types of jewellery, meaning that you have to focus on getting shells or tattoos to go up the track here, which is a good way to get points, and will also give you the freedom in order to claim the actions that you actually want without being locked out because people have got there before you and have placed relatively low die. So it's quite interesting the amount of things you have to juggle here. And getting the most and squeezing the most points out of every single placement is key in this game. And utilising these god cards is a big part of that. And just on top of managing the cards themselves and making sure you have an income of them, you need to make sure that you have these offerings as well, because you can't play a god card without an offering. But that might also give you more incentive to put more people on the temple, because you get one of these tiles, and the tiles are going to give you the freedom to do what you want when you want, really, without having the need for these offerings. So there is a ton of consequence for your actions here. If you're going to do one thing, you're probably going to neglect another thing. But as I said, that the way you utilise these people is a big part of getting around that. For example, some of them, let's have a look. I don't think there's one. Oh, there you go. This one here. For example, at the end of each round, I get to move move my hut to the next region as long as it's a 2 or below. And if I get a couple of those characters, it could be, say, a 4 or below or a 6 or below. So you're actually getting more mileage out of your turns if you collect certain characters. I also really enjoy that the way the personal player boards work, because of course you want to get your huts down on the board to get those points and the actual resources and things, but you actually need to get them down because you need the capacity to put these people down in the first place. Because again, if you haven't got an empty building on your personal board, then you're not going to have the option to put one of these people down. So I love the way that works, and sometimes that will force you to move things down to the last grid here, which is like an action you can take as just a contingency, really. And I also like the way that you can spend all these different action points by taking that action there, because you can really use that to your current kind of tactical need to take what you need. Do you need the offering to get one of these cards down? Do you need that option of having a god card? Do you need the odd resource which you haven't been able to claim so that you can get these different buildings down early? Because getting them down early is going to be a massive advantage than if you wait longer. So again, pressure's coming from all directions in this game. The thread of strategy that comes from the objectives themselves is also really interesting for me. I love the fact that you can think, you know what, in 3 turns time, there's going to be a ring that comes up on the jewelry track. Therefore, I'm going to wait for this to get this one achieved, and by then I'll have it done. But in the meantime, I'll focus on getting one of these characters, and hopefully by the next round after that, I'll go to this spot which will get me a card, and then I'll have 2 yellow cards in my hand. So I love the way that you have to pace yourself and kind of decide which order you're going to get these objectives done by, and also plan for the current objectives available to you and create those contingencies, because, you know, regardless whether you can complete that objective or not, you have to take a new one, and hopefully there's something there that's going to fit your game plan. But if not, you're going to have to be willing to pivot and zigzag when you need to. So the meaningful decisions in this game are abundant, just so much you need to mull over, which is just great for me. Mechanically, the game is also really simple. I've not had any issue teaching this one at all, despite being a mishmash of very dry mechanisms, I suppose. But they all make sense. You know, spreading from region to region is fine. Buying a bit of jewelry, easy. Just spend the shells. This is ultra simple area majority. This one is just basically push along the track as far as you can. So they're all very simple games in their own right. But when it comes together, it's kind of a better than the sum of its parts, which I normally feel about Stefan Feld games. You think, where is the magic coming from these games? But for some reason, they just seem to work. And I think it probably ties back to that dice system. You know, what actions are you going to prioritize? Can you afford to wait a bit longer because you have a low value die that you can sneak in after? It all just creates a great decision space. I think the time investment for Bora Bora is about right. You know, you're looking at 60 to 75 minutes for a 2-player game, which is the sweet spot for me. Maybe looking at that 90-minute mark for 3 players, and maybe 100 minutes or so for 4 players. But it doesn't even feel like it takes that long, because you are engrossed from start to finish, always planning on what you're going to do next. And also the uptime of the game is fantastic, because your actions don't take very long at all to resolve. I also think the replayability of Bora Bora is solid because, of course, I mentioned time and time again, there is so much you need to do, and you have to react to the dice that you're rolling, which might just kind of force you down or make you a bit tunnel visioned to go down different paths each game. Additionally, I love the variable objectives here. There are so many different objectives, and they will, of course, guide you down different paths. You know, perhaps this round or this game, you're going to be focused on getting next to these types of fish, or maybe you're going to take a more temple-driven strategy, which you wouldn't have done before, or maybe you need to keep shells back in order to buy the jewelry. So you're always reacting to these objectives available to you, which will just naturally steer the course of the game and make it feel different time after time. So the interaction is decent. It's not a tremendously interactive game, but I suppose most of the interaction comes from locking people out of the action spots. Of course, there is that little bit of competition for the temple here, which will sometimes just passively push people along. Maybe in smaller player count or lower player count games, that isn't going to be such a big factor. And also there's some competition for the tattoo track, because again, in higher player counts, you're going to be wanting to push along that track to make sure you're first in the following round and getting the victory points. But I think the interaction is fine. It's not a massive part of the game apart from that dice factor, and there's some competition for maybe particular people you're after, or getting the jump on people to claim the objectives that you might want, because other people might have those objectives in mind as well. So I think the production for Bora Bora is right for the game. You know, despite this game, being a bunch of kind of disjointed mini games, really, they do come together quite harmoniously, and I like the visual look of the game. Nice and bright and colourful. You know, the huts look good when they're on the board. You've got these nice wooden pieces. These tokens are a little bit small, but other than that, everything is perfectly fine. Actually, the card quality themselves is actually pretty decent for Ravensburger. So I've got no issue at all with the production. And again, I think it's more than appropriate for what the game is trying to achieve. Not overdone, not underdone, and it looks pretty impressive when it's set up. Okay, so time for final thoughts on Bora Bora. So first off, being such a huge Stefan Feld fan, my expectations for this game were sky high, and I'm so happy to say this game lived up to, and maybe even exceeded, my expectations. This is exactly what I want from a Feld game. Yes, it's dry, it's mechanical, but for me, the way that all these different mishmash of mechanisms come together so harmoniously is just a joy to behold. I find myself enticed by doing every single facet of the game. You want to spread your influence on the board because there's just points sitting there, and you want the resources. You want to be climbing this track here because it's going to be a ticking point for points every single round. You want to be making sure you're buying jewelry every single round because it's a pretty good ratio in terms of the cost and the points you get in return. That thread of strategy with the objectives and how you're going to map them accordingly is really engrossing. And the big part of the game for me is managing these male and female kind of tribesmen, I suppose. that for me is a big part of the game that really did take a minute or two to digest, because you are so enticed to do things that might benefit you short term, and sometimes you forsake things that will be long term. And I think striking the balance between the two and what's going to benefit you the most is where this game really shines, because you will just find yourself have an option here and think, you know what, now is the time for me to place one of these buildings down in the early round to get that big points injection of 10 points or so. But at the same time, I might not be working towards my objective, or I might not have that shell or two in my pocket in order to buy a piece of jewellery. So again, that consequence of your action really does shine in this game, and knowing how to be the most efficient and how to get every single point from every single placement you do is massive. And the fact that you only get 3 actions per turn and even get shut out of regions just hypes up that tenseness to 100 really. So I think it all comes together so brilliantly, and it's just a synergy that just shines. I suppose one of the biggest talking points that I can't ignore is how hard this game is to come by. It's out of print. You can't just go down to your shop and pick it up, or go online and pick it up. You're going to have to hunt high and low to find a copy, but I do think it's worth doing so if you do have that inclination to do so. But I do believe that one day this game will be reprinted. Maybe even the Queen collection will take a look at it, maybe give it a revamp. But I think games this good just deserve to be in the spotlight, and this one is definitely amongst the top tier of Feld games, which is something quite high praise for me to say, because I'm such a fan of pretty much all of his games. And again, this one is amongst the best. So I think this is a triumph of a game. So happy I've managed to get this into my collection, and it's certainly going to be one of these shining points in my collection. So this one is going to get my Elite Shield, which is my highest commendation for Bora Bora amongst Stefan Feld's finest. That is Bora Bora.